this program, Building Resiliency with Acupuncture and Chinese Medicine with Dana Schwartz. I'm Laurel Westendorf. I'm part of the Community Relations team at the Deschutes Public Library. Every month, we offer a variety of free programming for adults in the community, and you can find out what's happening next on our calendar at deschuteslibrary.org/calendar, or you can find recordings of programs like this one on our YouTube channel. If you in the audience have questions that come up during the program, please use the Q&A and we'll have our presenter answer them at the end. Dana Schwartz is a licensed acupuncturist, herbalist, massage therapist, and essential oil educator. She has over 20 years experience with mind-body medicine in areas of focus, including women's health and day-to-day stress, among many others. She has expertise in many modalities that support patient care, including Chinese herbal formulas, acupuncture, and using food as medicine. And she works at Wise Mountain Medicine in Bend. Thank you so much, Dana, for this part 2 to teach us more about building resiliency with Chinese medicine.
Thank you for the introduction, and thanks for everyone for being here. And I will just get started. Last week we spoke about some basic concepts in Chinese medicine. What is qi, which is energy? What is yin and yang, right? We talked about how it's yang, not yang. We talked about the 5 elements. And so you can always go back and look at that to just review some concepts. And today I'm going to talk a little bit more about how it shows up in ourselves, how to maybe use some of the diagnostic tools that we use as practitioners for yourselves at home as we're entering into winter, well, fall, but here in Bend, we feel, oh, well, it's hot today, but I know that winter is around the corner. So one of the ways that we build resiliency is actually, and to be resilient is to prepare our bodies, to prepare ourselves mentally and emotionally. And so it's wonderful you're watching this, and let's get started. Oh, a little bit more about this is just my family. I thought you should know who I am. This is me and my husband, David Watts. He's also an acupuncturist here in Bend. I work at Wise Mountain and he works at Hawthorne Healing Arts. And we met in acupuncture school. And this is our fur baby, little Sadie Grace, and she's a Yorkshire Terrier and she's almost 13. And I will say we use a lot of these principles of Chinese medicine for ourselves. We moved to Bend almost 7 years ago, and me being a New Yorker, him being a Californian, it was a big adjustment. And Chinese medicine has been woven through how we think. So let's first look at how actually the 5 climates show up in our body. This is a really important concept to grasp. You probably all have a natural way of thinking about this, that there's an inner knowing, an innate knowing about that some of these different influences, climates, temperatures can cause different reactions in our body, and we can work with them or protect ourselves depending on what's needed, right? So these can be pathogenic stressors, and they can become, or they can even begin. When I say begin, I mean from constitutionally, when we're born, it can begin as an internal pattern as well. So I'm going to take a little time with this one because I think this is fascinating, and it's really important for us to grasp these concepts of like, oh, when it's windy out. Here in Central Oregon, we get some wind. We get hot wind and we get cold wind, right? We get these different kinds of wind, and so we can kind of break down into that. But if we look at the nature of wind, and I'm going to read a little so I keep myself on track, we can see that it's very unpredictable wind. It can disturb things, right? It can send a disturbance into our day. We think we're doing one thing, and then here comes the wind. And it can really create disharmony. The most out of all the climates is wind. Right now, we have huge wind going on in Florida. We can send a little love down that way, right? Wind, it's such a big disturbance, and it can go from something to nothing, and it can impact us. Wind is often the way that a cold can happen. And in Chinese medicine, we say, oh, I have a wind heat respiratory problem or a wind cold respiratory problem. So this is how we start to see and differentiate the different patterns that come into the body. So we know, someone asked in the class last week, why do we wear a scarf? Or why has it always been said, why does my acupuncture so I say, put a scarf on after your treatment? Well, we have wind points that can relieve wind from the body in the back of our neck. But that also means that wind can come in here. So this is a vulnerability for ourselves. So forever we've protected as humanity, we've protected our neck. This is a place of vulnerability. And there are points all around the neck, actually, that can work with wind. And there are points all along the side of the body when we're talking about acupuncture points. Heat. Let's move on to heat. I could talk about wind the most because wind is the most disruptive, the most coming in out of nowhere, and can carry many other pathogenic factors. Wind. Let's move on to heat. Heat is, we know about heat to accelerate metabolic activity, right? Heat, there's a purpose for heat. There's a purpose for heat in our gut. We want to have that warmth in our heat, but heat can also lead to inflammation, swelling, pain when we're seeing it in the body. External heat can deplete us. It can have us feeling more deficient, right? So we can have heat strokes. Heat, sometimes we have sensations in our body like we're wanting warm liquids. Sometimes that's an indication that we're getting sick. This is how we're building that awareness, that we're building that resiliency by seeing that, oh, wow, I have an aversion to cold drinks today. That might mean that the immune system's kicked up a little bit, a little indication that, oh, warmth, I need some warmth in my body because I'm fighting off a cold, okay? We can also look at heat as a reddened appearance in the face, right? We can also look like that can happen from feeling frustrated, from feeling angry, from a temper flaring. That can be a heat expression. And we talked a little bit about the elementals last week. We can break that down into which organ pattern might be impacted by that heat. Just thinking about that, okay? Dampness. Dampness is a big one. Dampness, I like to think of it first when we're first learning this concept of dampness, to think about someone who might be living in a houseboat. They might start to acquire some dampness in their joints, some swelling, some maybe edema, some sensitivity to mold, different other kinds of pathogens that are attracted to dampness. The nature of dampness is to sink and accumulate. So when we get dampness in our body, we can accumulate toxins more easily. They can become a little more sticky. We can accumulate different viruses, different bacteria. So dampness, a really easy way to think about dampness might be to think about, the nose, saliva is a form of dampness. Also our phlegm. Phlegm would be a more intense form of how that dampness shows up. Dampness on the surface of the skin might be oiliness, right? So that clammy kind of oiliness might be dampness. And how does that impact us, right? So that person living on the boat who has those joints, they might do well by going on vacation in the desert and acquiring some dryness. That might be really good for their constitution because they're in the water too much. They're literally living on the water in that houseboat, as that example. So dryness, the nature of dryness, and we experience a lot of dryness in Central Oregon. People think of Oregon in the rest of the world and they think it's quite damp. But here in Central Oregon, we have a lot of dryness. And the nature of dryness is to wither and shrivel. right? So dryness damages fluids. We can look at the earth and see that dryness on the earth, dusty cracks in the earth. So the same can happen to us. That can be a pathogenic stressor to us, where we want to combat that with some moisturizing, some lubricants, some healthy ways of nourishing ourselves, again, combating that dryness. And then cold. Cold is an important one that in Chinese medicine we evaluate very differently when treating pain, for example, than perhaps Western medicine. So cold slows things down. We can think about that. If we have water, we have hot water, it's boiling, it's moving, it's rapid, and then we add some coldness to it, and it's going to slow that down to a stillness, to frozen. Cold slows things down. It can stagnate things. So it's great to throw some ice from the perspective of an athlete trying to get back on the field. It's great to throw some ice on that knee, that injured knee. It's going to slow that swelling down, that injury down, but it's also going to stagnate and leave that coldness in the joint. And perhaps from a Chinese medicine perspective, show up 10, 15 years later as arthritis. And this happens quite often with athletes that push their body and push through with a lot of cold application. So we practitioners of Chinese medicine prefer flushing, where we do hot, cold in instances like that. So those are the 5 climates that do impact the body. They're really good to know for us at home to see. Wow, it's windy today. I need to put on a scarf. Make sure I bring that scarf with me, even if I'm wearing a t-shirt, right? Just protect that neck. Or gosh, my gym, everyone in my workout class is sweating. It's so damp in there. I need to make sure when I go home that I take all those damp clothes off right away. Don't want to leave that damp clothes on our body, right? So thinking about those small things actually add up over time. So if we take the instance of cold, we don't want to eat a lot of cold foods as we're entering into the cold weather. That's going to slow down and stagnate our digestion. We want more healthy digestive fire. So we want to use that heat in there. So I hope that makes sense. I'm going to go on to the next slide and talk about the 5 emotions and how these play an impact on us and our health and our resiliency. If we let how these emotions impact our organ systems and how we feel in our bodies. So anger's the first, anger's the quickest, anger's that one that's hot. Anger rises. Anger can create that upward energy. A lot of headaches can happen if there's a lot of anger. There can be a lot of upward expressive emotions where we have blood pressure issues. We have neck problems. Sometimes with a lot of anger, the energy can get stuck in the neck and shoulders. And then we can also have, as we talked about last week, that anger inwards, where there's more depressive energy that can come. And the anger mostly impacts our liver. And it's a two-way street there. If our liver gets congested, we might feel a little irritable and angry. Or if we're feeling angry and irritable, our liver might get a little congested. So it's a two-way street there. Then we can talk about joy, which is a lot more fun. Joy is sort of that flip side of it. And joy comes from the heart. Joy is that big, boisterous emotion as well. And joy moves throughout. It's this kind of energy. But interestingly enough, sometimes joy can feel similar to anxiety. They have a similar experience in the body because they both are of the heart. So some might say anxiety is joy understood, like there's this unwielding energy to that joy that has become anxious. So that can impact the heart. That can impact how we are feeling. That can we can have arrhythmias. We can have tachycardia, things like that from too much joy or anxiety. A great way to think about that, because I know that I first had a pushback when I understood that, is to think about the kind of joy that someone might have on a roller coaster. That wild joy that is definitely a heart racing kind of joy, or that joy that you find out when you know you're going to have a child, or that joy that is just bubbling up and over. Okay, that's of the heart, and that could impact our heart. So when we find out we have these big emotions, we want to also tend to these organ systems. So rumination can stem from our digestive system, which in Chinese medicine is spleen, stomach. Also, large intestine can fit in there a little bit, but little bit. And that's rumination, where we are thinking and thinking and thinking. People who strategize also can fall into rumination. So there's a positive there, you know, good strategy. You're a good strategizer. You can think about these things, but then you can fall into rumination. And this can exhaust ourselves. This is a very mentally draining energy. And when we are caught in that kind of rumination, sometimes that can wear away at our immune system. Maybe then we're not sleeping at night very well. Maybe then we're carrying a lot of worry. Then maybe we're getting a little irritable, right? So you can see how the rumination might lead to the anger. This next one's big, sorrow, grief. This is the time of year where this emotion, as we enter, we're in transition, really. This is as we're in the beginning of fall and entering, then thinking of winter, as I mentioned. This is the lung, right? And this is also large intestine, where we have that grief. And grief can really wear away at our lung chi, our lung energy. When we're processing grief, often we'll catch a cold. Sometimes even bronchitis or pneumonia happens with deep processing grief. So we want to protect our lungs. We have lung points here right under our clavicle. These are two main lung points. These are great points. You can put your own hands on them when you're grieving. You can use essential oils on these points. I'll talk a little bit about what oils. This is a great place to give yourself support. There's also places on the arms, right? So getting that hugs, those support, but also acknowledging grief is really, really helpful. Unprocessed grief is what can also really drain those lungs. And sometimes we need to grieve and we need to catch that cold to give that process a chance to actually come out, right? So sometimes there's a mystery to it. It's not always about just staying well. Sometimes actually that cold helped us process. That can happen a lot. And then the last emotion in this arena that we're talking about that is fear. And it's a big one. Fear is very damaging to our immune system and our resiliency. If we're caught in fear, it can really wear away at us, and it impacts our kidney system the most, our kidney urinary bladder system. And that is where we carry the most resources. Our deepest resources are in those organ systems. The kidneys are in the low back, low to mid back, and a beautiful practice to work with the kidneys is to rub your hands together in the morning, especially if you're feeling that morning dread or fear, building up a lot of heat, and then placing your hands over those kidneys and feeling that heat warm those deep organ systems, filling up with light and positivity to combat that fear. Because also fear can pull and drain our energy. The same way, if our kidneys are weak, we might feel a lot of more fear more easily. We might feel more shock and get scattered even more easily. So these are the emotions, and that's a very short way of talking about how they can impact us and how they can actually rattle how we're feeling and move us from our center. And we want to acknowledge them. So I talked about in the beginning, this is not just about, remedies, but also just the awareness helps us build the resiliency. When we understand, then we can process. So let's look a little bit more ahead. It seems like it wants me to take me to the right, but I want to go to the left. So let's see. I might need your help. Oh, here we are. Okay. So I wanted to share some methods of inquiry, observation, and how we look as Chinese medicine practitioners at the body so that you yourself can start to do some self-observations, some understandings. You can see, maybe I'm getting sick, and catch it a little bit sooner than you might be now, right? And I love these two images, which is not quite on topic, but a little bit to give you this bigger, broader perspective of basically Western medicine is looking at this body. You can see here this image. The body is a machine, right? So this is this beautiful image. On the other side is body as a garden. And so the difference of how we approach these two bodies is fix, right? A machine, if something breaks, we need to fix, replace a part, maybe open it up, see what's happening. You see how I become a little very one piece after another, okay? Whereas the garden, it's a little more mysterious. There's a little more tending. There's an understanding of the landscape. Different areas might need tending in a different way, but it's all connected. It's all connected. It's all connected in the machine as well. We just sometimes forget, okay? So some topics that are ways that we look at the body are our tongue. I'm going to go into that a little bit deep today because it's fun. We as Chinese medicine practitioners, we will take your pulses, and we will take your pulses on both sides and on six different positions, and each one 3 different levels. And this is coordinating to all the different organ systems that I am now talking about. So the pulses are really a lifelong study. Some practitioners take your pulse for a really long time. Some are quick at it. We also really like to look at the breath. So this is something you at home can do. You can really start to notice, is there a quality to my breath today? Is there a different taste? And you probably have. You probably have noticed, oh, I have a different taste in my mouth today. Maybe I'm getting sick, right? Oh, it's a little gluey or metallic, right? Where there's these different subtle tastes that we can have when the body is off. And then we can also look at the elasticity of our skin, right? If we're a little dehydrated, we can see that. We can start to feel maybe more sensitivity in our skin when we're starting to feel a little sick. You can start to just even feel that. And that's what we call our wei qi. That's our defensive qi. That's Chinese medicine is equivalent to our immune system is wei qi, okay? So I'm going to show you some tongues. If you were here last week, we talked about it a little bit. And so if you weren't, that might be a little shocking to all of a sudden see a bunch of tongues on the next page. But this is one of our huge diagnostic tools that we can all kind of clue into. And I have friends who send me their tongues all the time. What's happening to my tongue today, Dana? Right? Because if you start to clue in, you can start to see there's subtle changes in the tongue. Oops, that's the wrong way. Here we go. So here we go. So if up here on the top is just showing you a little bit of geographic detail as to the areas on the tongue that are corresponding to the different organ system. Okay, so let's look at this one down here on the bottom on the left. You can see here, this is what scalloped tongue means. This is actually teeth marks, right? This tongue has gotten too swollen. So it's got the teeth marks to the side of the tongue to show you that there's a little bit of swelling there or some dampness. You see up here, it says Chinese diagnosis, spleen qi deficient with accumulation of dampness. There's some dampness here. So what this patient is experiencing is exhaustion, restlessness, epigastric fullness after eating. That would be dampness. They feel really full, belching. And then some heartburn. So heartburn, I want you to start thinking, would be what? Heat. So there is some heat signs in this tongue. These little teeny dots, I don't know if you can see them on your screen, but these little teeny red dots are signs of heat. Now this patient has no diagnosis, Western diagnosis. And the background to their disease is excessive sexual activity is what they're saying here, irregular eating habits, and overwork. Okay, so this person is only 28 years old. So as my husband likes to say, you don't have to be older to have patterns of disharmony. They happen at any age. So let's look at the next tongue. Is this interesting to you guys? Tell me in the chat if you like it, because it's really hard to know without seeing your faces if the tongue is interesting or not, because I find it fascinating. So I'm going to show you a couple more. This is the tongue of a 40-year-old female. And this yellowness means that she's got some heat. Yellow would be heat. But she also has some, what? Dampness. So this is some damp heat that's causing some irregular bowel movements, headaches, swelling, fingers in the morning, pain in the epigastrium under the ribs, a feeling of fullness again, that dampness, and constipation. So I just want to make note of this. These are all what we would consider perhaps subtle things, but they're not. These are things that this person every day is dealing with. So there's no Western diagnosis here, but there's constipation, stomach pain, feeling of fullness, pain under the ribs, headaches, and swelling every day. So something's not right, right? And so we can see from this tongue, there's work here that we can help this person feel better, which will build resiliency so that the day-to-day feeling like this, when you encounter a flu or a bigger disease like we've been dealing with, maybe you have a little more resiliency to meet it, okay? Let's look at the next one. And so I do have some home remedies we'll talk, but a little bit more tongues because they're so gross and weird. Get to see my weirdness. So let's look at this one on the left. This person's main symptoms are headaches, pain at the back of the neck, weight gain, and fatigue. Again, they have no Western diagnosis, but here we have accumulation again of cold damp. And then we have spleen, chi, and blood deficiency. And these are a little bit more complex for me to share with and go into here. But this person has an excessive consumption of sweet foods and excessive worrying in that rumination department, which wears away at their digestive system, which in Chinese medicine would be spleen and stomach. So here we have spleen. And you see all of this in the tongue, believe it or not. All of it. Amazing, huh? So I think I'll just show you this one last tongue with this big, deep crack, because cracks are interesting. So if you probably are all looking at your tongue, or maybe you will later, I encourage it. Cracks are interesting because they're probably not going to go away. They're not going to change, like some of the coatings and the color might change. But it shows a long pattern of mental overwork. This patient is 52 years old, so there's more time to create this deep crack. This patient is also in menopause, so there's some drying that happens in menopause, the crack, like we talked about, the drying. Their symptoms that they're having is severe attacks of fear and panic. This tongue shows this. Feeling of pressure in the head and cold hands and feet. This tongue is also showing some cold. So really interesting what we can see on the tongue. I tell my patients the tongue is the closest thing on the inside of the body that we can see, right? So it's kind of like looking with an endoscope into the body, and you can really see a lot about the inside of the tissue that's happening in there. You might have questions on this, and go ahead, throw them down, because I'm curious about them, and I'll just keep going. Oh, this tongue up here, and I didn't talk about too much, but I thought it was interesting to show, is this is a tongue that of somebody who has a high pattern of alcohol and nicotine and caffeine use, you can see it's pretty dry. So you can start to see there's a dryness happening because alcohol, nicotine, and caffeine are all drying to the body. When we do it every day, even if we're drinking a ton of water, there's places like the tongue where it will show. So let's talk strategies and some home care ideas. Everyone's home apothecary might look like this after the last 2 years. But I'm going to just give you some really basic, simple techniques. And there are as many techniques as we can, there are so many, but I just wanted to give you a couple really great ones that you can walk away with and use. Anyone can do. The first is teas. And everyone knows you're not feeling well, you're gonna brew a cup of tea. But the difference in making just a regular tea and a medicinal tea is how long you steep it. And this goes so long. Whenever over the last 2 years, when people would get COVID, I would recommend this tea for them. And if it didn't work and really help them move things through, I knew they didn't steep it long enough. I just knew that was the problem. So if you want a medicinal tea to work, you need to steep it for at least 45 minutes to an hour. And even better is cycle it through cooling and heating all day. So just slice up that ginger, bring it to a boil, and then turn it down. Do not keep it at a boil. That will weaken the tea and make a mess. And then you can just keep adding water and heating it all day and sip this tea. It is not a race to finish it. It's a sip all day for as many days as you can. Boom. The only time you are not going to use ginger when you're looking at a respiratory flu or cold is when you have a sore throat. It's too hot. It's just too hot of an herb and will burn your throat. Okay, so let's just talk a little bit more about ginger because it's so awesome and we have it all the time at our fingertips, hopefully. Xianjiang is what we call it in Chinese medicine. It is the basis of most of our formulas. It's in a lot of formulas. And again, here, we don't want to put that with the sore throat. It's a natural antibiotic. It's an antiviral. It's detoxifying, and it does support circulation. It can act as an expectorant. It can support the stomach and digestive. It moves through phlegm, so white or clear, not green, right? We're not going to really think of ginger for the green phlegm, but that white or even a little yellow as it's starting to get a little hotter. That's when it turns yellow. But it really invigorates the blood and warms the channel. So this is an important thing when we're sick and we're laying on the couch or in our bed for a few days. The blood can stagnate. We want to keep a little bit of movement, and if we don't have the energy for that kind of movement, that ginger is going to help move our blood really great. So what do we do if we have sore throat? Everyone can do this. Of course, we as Chinese practitioners and as an herbalist, I can make a specific formula for your needs. But this is what can you do at home? Everybody has probably heard of traditional medicine's throat coat tea, and you're just going to brew it the same as the ginger with 5 or 6 tea bags, and you're going to brew it for 45 minutes, not boiling, and drink that with sipping it for a little while throughout the day. This is going to really help move that throat through that soreness. So the difference, the walk away that I want you to have is when you're wanting to make it medicinal, brew it longer, do not boil, and you're going to get a lot stronger of a tea. And everybody, next time you go grocery shopping, just get a bunch of ginger and keep that in your refrigerator so you always have it. First sign, brew up that ginger tea. Don't wait. That's what happens. I know everyone waits. 2 or 3 days, they text me, I guess I'll start making the ginger tea. Do it right away. Okay. Now, cough, there's the cold care. So I would recommend having the throat coat, the cold care, and the ginger tea in your home. If you have one of those additional stubborn, persistent coughs, which can happen, particularly here with the dryness, a lot of people get these lingering coughs after a cold, COVID, any of these viruses, flus that are going around. I love a topical chest rub made from frankincense and marjoram. And I put the Chinese pinyin names here for you, Ru Shang and Mo Jiangliang. You just combine those two in some jojoba, and I have the recipe for you next. And you apply it on the front and the back 2 to 3 times a day, and you will see a huge shift in that cough pretty fast. It's coming up the recipe in a minute. I'll show you that. Sorry, I should have had it right after. The next thing that I want you to do is sweat. Now, I want to be really clear. This is at the early stage before you reach a high fever. If you've reached 101, you've missed the moment to sweat. The sweating is going to help vent. It's going to boost that wei qi, that immune system, that lung qi. The wei qi comes from the lungs. It's going to help clear debris in our system, push it out through the sweat. It's going to elevate our body temperature, which from a Western perspective helps the immune system kill off the viruses faster. Even this year, it has been acknowledged by the Pediatric Association that we really want to let a fever go to 101. We really want to, unless there's a lot of discomfort. And that's where I love to use essential oils, is to work with the fever discomfort. And we'll talk about that, I think, with the chest rub. Because that fever is there for a purpose. But of course, if it goes over in those scary ranges, we want to use a fever reducer. But let's talk about this home technique for sweating, okay? So you're going to get some Epsom salts, add that to your list with the teas, some Epsom salts, and you're going to make a hot bath. And you're going to gather a bunch of old bath and beach towels, bigger towels, and you're going to pull back your comforter. You're going to lay down those towels and jump in the bath. Okay, so you're going to add 2 to 3 cups of Epsom salts and soak for about 10 to 20 minutes in a hot bath. You really want to soak in that hot bath, get yourself nice and warm. Jump out of the bath, and I say jump because you kind of want to keep that heat inside. Towel yourself off. Don't slip. Don't worry about getting too dry. Lay down on those towels. Put the other towels on top, the comforter on top. Cover your head. Basically, you want to do all of that before you cool off, and you want to sweat for 20 minutes to an hour, depending on your constitution. So if you are a big, strong person, you can do that hour. If there's somebody who's a little more frail, then maybe more like 20 minutes. Also age-related, probably above 60 years old, you want to go for the shorter amount of time. And as I put here, above 50, or if you have any heart conditions, you just want to clear it with your MD that you can do this sweating technique. Great technique. This is going to help push it through. Now, is it going to clear it 100%? Probably not. It's possible. It's going to absolutely help you move through much more quickly. So this is a great one. You might want to screenshot if you know how to do that. Yes, and here I'm going to talk about the other bits. So I absolutely love having that chest rub. You can do steams. Steams are great. You can put oils on the spine. They can help. So oils like peppermint, marjoram, and myrrh are really great to have around for fevers. Okay. Liniments are really wonderful to also have, like, the classic tiger balm. But Posamon oil is a really wonderful liniment to have around. We have pain patches so that we can avoid the lidocaine pain patches and have an herbal pain patch. And that's really great when we have the aches and the pains for flus. Anything we can do to reduce our liver stress is helpful, right? Moxa warming patches are wonderful. They're almost like those heat pat that you can throw in your gloves when you're going cross-country skiing, but they work. They last for a lot longer, and they have moxibustion, which is mugwort, which is an herb that helps move blood. So I also wrote that we want to have hot, cold applications in our home apothecary, not just ice. So you can do that flushing technique and end on the warm, and you'll have a lot more results this way. So I think the recipe is coming up. Yeah, here we are. So when not responding to ginger tea, sweating, and you're not getting anywhere with like a stubborn cough, I like to get the jojoba oil from Trader Joe's. Trader Joe's has an amazing jojoba oil, and I love it because it's very similar to our skin, and it helps us absorb a lot easier. And so 40 drops of frankincense and 40 drops of marjoram, and you can have your really great chest rub there. The marjoram is really helpful to relieve any kind of muscle pain and also calm that cough. So you want to coat the upper chest and the back with that oil 2 to 3 times a day, and you should feel relief within the first 24 hours. I love that recipe. It's just simple and easy. And that's it for today. I did want to give you all some recommended reading. The Web That Has No Weaver, and you guys had asked me that. The Web That Has No Weaver by Ted Ketchup. This is what it looks like. This is a fantastic book for if you're like, hey, I want to understand what Chinese medicine is all about. It's not that big. It's really great. And this one, Between Heaven and Earth, actually has some recipes, some food, Chinese food tips and ways to work with that, which I think is really nice, especially when we're first learning. So you can see there's a whole area in the back where it also gives you an assessment where you can kind of check off and learn a little bit about your tendencies and your constitution, and maybe what's your strengths and maybe what's a little weak, and where to build that resiliency up. Oh gosh, I need to really work on my kidney strength and what to do and how to do that. And this is another book that I don't have on the list. This is my favorite Qigong book. This is Medical Qigong. And in fact, this is my website down here, Wise Mountain Medicine. I will be offering some free Qigong classes in the park starting in November. Yes, it will be cold, but we can do it, and it's wonderful practice. So Medical Qigong. And this is my office, Wise Mountain Medicine, in case you were wanting to find me. And thanks so much for your attention. I know that was a lot of details, but hopefully you learned something, and maybe there's some questions.
Yes, that was very interesting. I know you're covering a lot in just a piece in a very short amount of time, Dana. There's one question so far, and they're asking, I think they're referring to the ginger. Is that how you steep leafy teas too, such as ashwagandha? I don't know how to spell that. I don't know how to pronounce that.
So any medicinal tea you can do this way. It's just you do not want to boil, and certain ones like ashwagandha, certain leafy teas are more delicate, and that's where we can get into knowing the right temperature, especially green teas, white teas. So I don't actually know the proper temperature, say for ashwagandha, but those are things that really help make it just a cup of tea versus a medicinal cup of tea.
Feel free to type in the chat or Q&A if you have any other questions for Dana. And the medicinal Qigong that you're talking about, and that's the one where you do the movements. Is that what am I picturing the right thing?
So yeah, this is a great question. So Qigong is like acupuncture, 6,000 years old. There's so many different kinds. Medical Qigong that I'm speaking of is called the Golden Eight, and it goes through the different organ systems. So the first exercise is for the lungs and the large intestine, and then we learn that for a week. And then the second week we learn an exercise for the liver and gallbladder. And then the third week, we learn for the heart and small intestine, and so on. So we go through the different organ systems to create 8 exercises. So it's something I might, for example, if I have a patient who comes in who has a lot of heart stuff going on, we might go through and learn the heart Qigong exercise so they can practice that for 10 minutes at home. A simple exercise.
Okay, wonderful. And we had someone ask, what do you recommend for headaches?
So headaches, there's a lot of kinds of headaches. So you might want to tell me more. Is it a chronic headaches happening all the time? Headaches that happen in the morning, headaches that happen with food, right? So headaches that happen with change of temperature. There's a lot of different ways we would handle each one of those headaches. But I will say when we're talking about temperature and climate, like an emotion like we did today, one way, a very basic way to deal with headaches is to soak your feet in a basin of warm water with Epsom salts. If you have a headache and you can't get in the bath, just bringing that energy down into your feet, because the headache, the energy's here. So it's one way, right? Having someone rub your feet is really helpful. But without knowing more, that's one basic strategy I could suggest. Did someone say more stuff?
They said it was related to stress. And I mean, this is why acupuncturists and Chinese medicine folks ask you so many questions when you go into their office, because they want to know.
Yeah. There's really no two headaches that are the same unless it's yours. And you're like, I know this headache, right? So that's why we really like to know a lot. I see another question, I think.
They said the basin of water was already very helpful. So that's great. Good. And yeah, we know this is a very broad overview really quickly. And unfortunately, we were unable to record part 1 because we had some technical difficulties. But I am very happy that you came back for part 2, Dana.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, it's really fun to learn more about this whole aspect and how we can take more care of ourselves as we go into the winter. So
yeah, just some simple, basic little ways to tend to ourselves.
Yeah, very approachable.
And finding someone to partner with so that when you do, whether it's me, someone else in town, like when you do find yourself not feeling well, you're not scrambling, right? You have that apothecary, you have some tools at home, you have someone you can reach out to say, hey, I don't feel so great. Because the truth is, when we're the patient, even me, and I know the answers, I don't use them. It's really hard to think of using them when we don't feel well. So having someone to partner with to really know, okay, these are some suggestions to do at this time is really helpful for sure. Yeah,
prepping that so you're not sick and putting drops of frankincense into the jojoba oil. Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah, just being ready.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the lessons of the last couple of years for me, for sure, is just having a little at-home prep bag for my mom, for my stepfather, for my dad, for my sister, just like teaching people to have things ready at home so that when we meet something that we're not quite sure what to do with, we have a couple options. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Well, thank you. These are very practical tips, and thank you for those of you who joined us tonight. And I hope you all have a wonderful evening and a smoke-free day tomorrow. So
yes, thank you. Have a wonderful night. Bye, everyone.